Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted in Science. I'm Shielvy Wong, Director of R&D here at Apothékary. Today, we're starting with a question that is surprisingly hard to answer. Why am I always so tired? I want everyone listening to think about this for a second. When was the last time you felt genuinely energized? Was it yesterday, last month? Chances are you might not even remember, and by the time you think about what I just said, you're probably reaching for your third cup of coffee. But what if that feeling of being tired is just a symptom and the real story starts inside your cells? In many ways, that question led us to create our latest formula, Power Trip. Throughout today's episode, we'll explore the science behind it and the thinking that shaped this formula. Joining me once again is Dr. Matt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Matt Kester. I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and I'm nationally board certified in both of those and licensed in Washington and Colorado, and have been in private practice, education, and also have a background in science research, in particular, molecular microbial ecology and biology and things of that nature. So lovely to join you all.
So, Matt, imagine your body just had a power outage. No movement, no thought, no signal. What keeps everything running?
It's a good question. So really, when we're talking about like a power outage, that sort of thing, there's always something running in the background, and that thing running in the background are our mitochondria. And the mitochondria are the best way I like to think about them is like little powerhouses, little hydrogen fuel cells that actually provide our cells with the type of energy that they use. And the way I like to think about it, and like is kind of it's a kind of a fun way. Our cells, the way they're set up, are like little houses, basically, where there's an obvious outside wall, but then you walk in and there's different rooms and they're designed to do different things. So, like, there's a kitchen, there's a bathroom, there's a bedroom, there's a living room, that sort of thing. And so they're built for different functions. And our cells are similar, where they have these little membranes that you have a place just for like the nucleus. DNA is housed there, RNA can be found there. You have areas for breaking things down, but you also have this little room, the mitochondria, which are designed specifically for generating something called ATP. And that's the energy that our cells actually use. So, like when we consume glucose in particular or food, we don't like burn that directly. We actually go through, and what we really want is electrons of all things from like the sugar we eat, and we use that to help us glue together the pieces of the ATP. And that's like what we actually go and spend to do work, to go carry out the things that our cells need to do, build things, move things, just kind of maintenance themselves, take care of themselves. You can find it everywhere. And one critical piece of that I know we're going to talk about, and that's on my mind is NAD plus, which is something that's pretty critical and pretty cool, because we can't talk about energy and tiredness and that sort of thing without talking about this NAD. So, yeah.
Sure. But when people say, I have no energy, they're typically describing an experience, not necessarily a biological process. In your mind, how does traditional Chinese medicine think about that?
Oh, that's a really good distinction, because our having no energy, the experience of having no energy is definitely different from actually not making enough. And they're certainly intertwined, of course, but they're different because the idea of how we make energy that we use from a Chinese medical sense versus a biomedical sense, they're certainly related, but it's almost in some ways a more complex process in Chinese medicine. And the reason I say that is because one of the hallmarks of Chinese medicine, or two pieces, I should say, is qi, which you hear about quite a bit, which is the energy of life, as well as something called five element theory. And that's going to be something you may have seen in the past. The five elements that are found in Chinese medicine are a little bit different than the West. You'll see fire, you'll see earth, metal, water, and wood. And what they really are a way of organizing the functions and the structures of the body. What's really interesting about that is that there's not just like one type of energy or one type of chi. There's each organ has its own version that comes together to create the overall energy that we use each day. And so it's important that there's good interaction and interplay between all of these things. Um, in particular, like one good example is the lungs, because we, from a biomedical perspective and also East Asian medicine, we have to breathe. We need oxygen. We need to get rid of carbon dioxide. But that oxygen is really important because as energy flows through our system, think electrons getting taken off atoms, and they need a destination, so they head towards oxygen. Our lungs are of course deeply responsible for bringing that oxygen in and then allowing it to get disseminated in the blood. But when we talk about energy from an East Asian medicine sense, it goes so much deeper because whenever we talk about an organ, we talk about not just its function, but also an emotion. There's always an emotion associated with each organ in Chinese medicine. And the lungs, I think, really illustrate this because the emotion of the lungs is grief. And grief is interesting because it's something we will all encounter. It's meant to be survived, but when grief is incomplete or gets stuck, then it becomes a pathogen in Chinese medicine. The experience itself is not. It's essential, honestly. But what's interesting about it is anybody that's been through a deep level of grief knows that it's a special type of tired. And where that kind of plays into East Asian medicine is that grief interferes with our lungs' ability to create the chi that they need to produce for us to make our energy. So it often feels like when we're grieving, like somebody turned the dial down and kind of closed down like the pipeline of energy. And it's because the mechanism is inhibited. So the reason I bring all this up, it might seem like I'm kind of drifting a little bit, is because that's the difference between the experience of tired versus like actually not making enough energy. Our cells are still supplying us with energy, and grief actually takes quite a bit of energy to process through. So it's almost more essential that your body can output that energy. But when we get challenged by the emotions of our life, or just the experiences of our life, it can inhibit that mechanism, and that makes us feel tired. And it goes beyond lungs. When we get to the digestion, it's really interesting, especially when we talk about stomach and pancreas. The emotions of the stomach are nostalgia, and the emotions of the pancreas are overthinking and worry. And it's interesting because it goes both ways. Like if there's something challenging your digestion, it's hard to feel calm and not be worried about things. But vice versa, if you have a lot to worry about, or there's a lot on your mind, or it's just your nature, it can also impact the digestion. Think upset stomach, and you can see digestive trouble when you go to the bathroom, that sort of thing. And they, they play together in an important way, both the lungs, of course, the digestion, and then finally, kind of one last piece is the small intestine. That one's really important for absorption biomedically and, of course, Chinese medically. But the emotion of the small intestines is a little bit harder to describe, but it's basically where we sift through what we intake in a day. So, like when we eat food, we obviously kind of sift through the pieces that we need, and we take those up, and the pieces we don't need, and we let those pass through. When we just don't hold on to those. But that's emotionally the same way as well. Where as we go through a day, we're constantly sifting. Like there's things we experience that are wonderful or neutral or difficult, and we have to decide at some level what is kept and what we let go of. And so, yeah, energy is so much more complicated, and I guess really holistically looked at, of course, with Chinese medicine versus just a simple kind of battery on or off type approach that sometimes you might see with a biomedical sense.
It's interesting because in Western science, we often think about the mind and body as separate systems, but what you're describing is actually a much more connected picture where our emotions, digestion, breathing, and energy are all influencing one another. And you know what? I see this all the time show up in my own life. Like if I open my email inbox and I see 247 unread emails, my shoulders start to tense up, right? My
Yeah.
breathing changes, my stomach tightens. And I haven't even read the first email yet. And so, if a TCM practitioner looked at that situation, what would they see that Western medicine might not?
This is a good question. Yeah, we would definitely take a closer look at the fact that it's like where you experience these things in your body is important because it tells us how you personally experience your world, and it tells us where your balance point needs to be it because where your balance point is certainly different than mine, but also what you need today might be different than what you needed yesterday or tomorrow kind of thing. And so it's meant to be a real time response to what you're experiencing and need in the moment, as well as trying to do our best to help you be more resilient into the future. Um, kind of a, well, you mentioned digestion, kind of a fun way to think about it too is digestion is so key to energy. And, there's so much we can go into with that, but we really use so many beacons in digestion as a way to also understand how we're generating energy to process our emotions, because the whole idea of really that processing can take its toll on our stomach, that overthinking part, because we have to experience, we have to engage, we have to think about it at some level as we move forward in our process. But it can take its toll, which inevitably can kind of impact how we absorb just our nutrients. And so, of all things, we look at an easy beacon is when we're using foods to kind of support us and nourish us, is whether or not we see our digestion slow down, feel sluggish. Like when you eat something that maybe isn't serving you super well, it can feel like it's taking a lot of energy to digest. Oftentimes, you see more mucus produced in your nose. You'll see more mucus produced in your throat. And it just means that either through stuff that you're taking in or stuff that you're emotionally processing, it's just weighing heavily on your digestive process. And what's interesting is the digestion itself. Gosh, with your GI tract, I once heard a description of this to kind of put it in context. But if you took a cat's brain, and cats are super duper smart, and you take all the neurons in a cat's brain, that's what just basically runs our digestive tract. So this idea of processing with your body, processing with a gut feeling, and paying attention to what's going on with your digestion has some really well-rooted science to go along with it. But yeah, of all things, I know I mentioned mucus, but mucus is an interesting way to also kind of keep track of how well you're processing what you consume, so you know how well you're recovering good stuff from it.
I know mucus gets a bad reputation, but it's actually one of the body's natural protective mechanisms. And, I never really thought about how it fits into the bigger picture of what you're describing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about it that way, but yeah, it's usually something we try to avoid. But yeah, it's so useful to pay attention to.
And you also mentioned about overeating.
Mm.
We've definitely all experienced that food coma, let's say after the holidays, after the Thanksgiving dinner, where you're thinking you're just going to sit down for 5 minutes, but then you wake up 2 hours later. Is that because our body is just putting so much energy into digestion?
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for summing it up because I was kind of alluding to it that, it takes work to break down our food initially, because, it's a structure, right? Whether we're eating vegetables or chips or turkey or what have you. So we have to invest energy and literal material to kind of break everything down. I always kind of like to think about it like Legos. So it's like we're given like a chicken leg made out of Legos, and we have to break all those Legos apart so that way we can rebuild it to look like one of our muscles or our skin or hair. And so it just takes work. So the more difficult it is to do that work, the more we'll feel it quite often, right? Where just like you said, like that food coma where you're sluggish, foggy headed, um, you don't feel energized. And that's useful to know because as we talk about energy, digestion, of course, is a piece that can't be pulled away from that. So if it's totally like everything in moderation, including moderation, you got to live. But if you're on the regular eating foods that make you feel slow and sluggish, pay attention, because you're putting fuel in the tank. And if it doesn't feel like it's charging up your battery a little bit, then that's maybe saying that, it's something worth noting and starting to investigate some other options for you that might serve you better.
So the common thread here is that our bodies are doing so much more behind the scenes than we realize. And that's what makes this conversation about so much more than just feeling tired. One thing I will say is that I find it very interesting how closely energy and healthy aging are connected. Over the last couple of years, for example, it feels like everyone is talking about longevity. So I'm curious, for everyone that's listening out there, when you hear the word longevity, what comes to mind? Is it living to 100, looking younger, having more energy? Let us know in the comments because I have a feeling everyone defines it a little bit differently. Personally, I think what most of us are chasing isn't just a longer life, it's a better one. It's what people call health span. We want to feel strong, think clearly, and walk down the stairs without our joints sounding like a bowl of Rice Krispies. And to me, that's what age maxing is all about. If you think about it, we're already doing it. We're trying to sleep better, work out more, eat better, and manage our stress, all in the name of aging well. And, at the end of the day, so much of that comes back to how our bodies make and use energy. So, how does supporting our body's energy today shape how we age over time?
Oh, great question. There's so much we can go get into on this. It's sometimes hard for me to find like a good starting point, but essentially, we only have so much energy in a day, like quite literally, right? Like we all have a limit based on like what we can put out in a day. No news there. But when we think about that there's a limit to what we can put out, know that your cells are, we're a collection of cells. Your cells are the same. And so they have work to do. And it's like taking care of their house, right? Where in some cases, they need to do repair work. Other cases, they might be trying to divide or just carry out their normal function. But it's like you only have so much of that currency, that ATP, that you really can consume in a day. I mean, your cells only have so much they can produce. And so if they have to choose between surviving today or thinking about tomorrow, they often choose to default to like the moment, right? Because they're surviving now. They're living in the moment, quite literally. And so by ensuring that our cells have as many of the resources that they need to carry out their normal activity, we're giving them everything they hopefully need in order to keep us in this place of homeostasis, or this balance point where they're able to just move through their day as efficiently as possible, and they're not having to make resource choices of like, do I need to just repair something or do I need to just survive today? Because we want them to do the repair and we want them to have resources for the future, because that's where this conversation intersects. And I think one of the reasons why the emotions thing came to mind early on, and where this kind of plays into this, is that we see this play out not just at the cellular level, but at the person level, when kind of going back to like grief, or when people have something really difficult that they're dealing with, we'll often say that it looks like it aged them. And it's because they were surviving in the moment based on difficulties, whether it be like work, relationships, loss, illness, what have you. I feel like for me, a good way to kind of put it into perspective, where your body had to make resource decisions and you're alive. It did a good job. You are here, like right on. But it also means that you can see that there was a shifting of gears. And so people bounce back. We're resilient. We can repair. Don't get me wrong, but you can see that in people. And like I said, in my practice, I've often helped people move through and support the normal process of grieving or emotional processing. And that's a lot of what we do, is keep their energy up in order to give them the resources to move forward. And that's the whole idea in my mind of longevity and health span, is having the resources to move forward in the best possible, most active, healthy, happiest way that you can. Um,
So it's almost like having a budget. If you're spending everything just getting through today, then there's just really not much left for
yeah.
maintenance and repair for tomorrow. And actually, you bring up a good point because that actually reminds me of something that happened to me. I feel compelled to share with you a survival story. So, a couple of years ago, my husband and I were driving through Costa Rica when Google Maps took us off the beaten path and then off the road altogether. Before we knew it, we were just surrounded by dense rainforests and stuck in a flooded mangrove with no one else in sight. And at that point, of course, our Land Rover sank into the mud, and then we just kept spinning the wheels, hoping we'd break free. Fortunately, another vehicle eventually came through, and then, of course, we made our way back to civilization. But looking back, it didn't matter how brief that ordeal was. What stuck with me was how quickly survival just took over. Like in that moment, I definitely wasn't thinking about healthy aging. I was thinking about trying to live to make it tomorrow, right? But I am curious for everyone's that's listening, have you ever had one of those moments where your body just flipped into survival mode? Maybe it wasn't getting stranded in a rainforest. Maybe it was doom scrolling before bed, suddenly questioning the produce in your fridge, or maybe it was juggling work, kids, and everything that life throws at you. So let us know in the comments. I feel like a lot more people have experienced this kind of survival mode than we actually realize. Because that got me thinking that when we're in survival mode, does our body actually change the way it produces and uses energy?
We often talk about kind of the fight, flight, or freeze response. That part, like that division of our nervous system, kind of when we are in the middle of dealing with something very serious, whether it be getting out of a really difficult situation where you could be harmed, like in Costa Rica, or just other experiences that can lead you there. But the flip side of that, kind of the yin and the yang, of course, is the rest, digest, and heal. And so, are your cells making ATP for both processes? Absolutely. Like, right, they're using that same currency. But your body and your experience and your mind are telling are telling your cells where to send that ATP, if that makes sense. It is different, and the way that you're producing energy, the type, the way it's being used based on hormones that are released. We often talk about cortisol, but epinephrine in particular is one that when we're fully in the fight or flight response, or adrenaline, as you often hear it called too, that's going to get us to use energy. It's meant for short term, like huge output, like putting your foot on the accelerator kind of vibe, versus like rest, digest, and heal, which is all about just kind of cruising and going down the road a lot more at a much more reasonable pace because you're doing other things. And so, yeah, we have the capacity to rapidly switch where our energy goes, clearly. And so that often, it's not necessarily the switch that's hard per se. Like we can make the switch when the situation calls for it, but it's often getting back to that ground state where we can heal and restore. That's the difficult part, interestingly.
So, but then what happens if, for example, our bodies stay in a chronic state of survival mode, like for weeks, months, or even
Question.
years? What does that mean for how we age?
That's a great question. So when you're in that space, which I mean, honestly, so many of us are, right? Just going through our days, they're incredibly stressful. And it puts us into that neighborhood of the fight, flight, or freeze response. It means we're spending more resources ready to run, ready to take a hit, emotionally, physically, whatever. Um, Trying to protect ourselves from an impending injury is kind of the vibe, versus going back and actually doing restoration, um, building resilience. Fight and flight is meant to be a shorter term experience, right? Where it's just meant to get us out of situations. But our days so often call for us to be in that space that resources get spent there. And so invariably less repair work gets done. Kind of an example of this is I mentioned epinephrine. That is used, that our body produces in the fight or flight response. One way to think about this is when we have an overactive immune response, think like a dangerous allergy, things are kind of out of whack. We use epinephrine to squash that immune response. It shuts it down. Life-saving, amazing, that sort of thing. But it illustrates the idea that being in that space quiets the immune response, whereas we want to be able to work over into a healthy, restorative, balanced immune space where our cells can go through and there's good housekeeping immune response going on, because our immune system does more than protect us just from viruses and bacteria and that sort of thing. I mean, of course it does that, but there's also a lot of scavenging and a lot of like housekeeping of old cells, breaking things down that aren't needed, because our cells have a lifespan and they have a useful life. And our immune system is absolutely essential at going through and making sure everything gets cleaned up and we clear out things that aren't working well. So that way our body can be as resilient as possible. So yeah, being in that fight or flight response keeps us out of that healing restorative response. It forces our body to choose.
Fascinating. So now that we understand why cellular energy matters, let's talk about the ingredient at the heart of Power Trip, NMN. It sounds a little bit like M&Ms, but unlike M&Ms, is actually something your body naturally produces. You can, get small amounts from foods like broccoli, avocados, and cucumbers. But to get the amount that's found in a typical NMN supplement, you'd have to eat roughly about 100 pounds of broccoli. Now, I don't know about you, Matt. I'm not I'm not equipped to eat 100 pounds. So, what exactly is NMN and what made it the centerpiece of this formula?
Absolutely. To tell the story of NMN, I first need to mention what we're trying to do with it. There's a molecule that's getting a lot of attention right now, and I touched on it earlier. I can't even talk about energy without bringing it up, but it's NAD plus, and that stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a whole mouthful with a positive charge. That's the plus thing on there. Why that even matters is because that molecule is essential. It is used in so many steps of how we grab electrons off of glucose in particular and move them around in our mitochondria to build this ATP. Our mitochondria kind of work like little hydrogen fuel cells, if you're familiar with those. And so I was under this illusion before we really got into this project, that because NAD plus is so critical, that we kept our levels fairly steady throughout our life, because we need ATP. I was wrong. The literature reflects that as we age, like most things, we tend not to make enough of it. And so it's a good idea to try and work with those levels to make us feel different, more energetic. Here's the kicker with NAD plus though, because the question might be like, why don't you just take it? Our digestive system breaks it down if we take it orally almost immediately. Like it just doesn't really go anywhere. We just snap it into pieces because our digestive process is meant to do that. And so oftentimes you'll see people doing NAD plus injections to try and circumvent the digestive process. Well, we have an easier solution, and it's this NMN. It's this nicotinamide mononucleotide. And what it is it's literally the molecule that comes right before the NAD+. So your body knows exactly what to do with it. But the good part is it survives digestion. And when we looked into the literature, we found that when there's been experiments done and whatnot, that you can take NMN at the levels that we've put it in to our Power Trip at the recommended dosage, that kind of stuff. And it corresponds to these levels that show an increase of NAD plus in your blood. So not only does your body know what to do with it, but it's getting where it needs to go. It can do what it's supposed to do. So it's something you can eat. You don't have to inject. And what's amazing is it literally is just like one step away from the NAD plus. So it's not like a whole bunch of stuff needs to happen. There's even like a special set of enzymes that are designed just for that purpose to take the mononucleotide and switch it over to the NAD plus. So that's why it's in there.
So what I'm hearing is it's about efficient absorption and not about finding a shortcut. And working with, of course, the biology that your body already has.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. I think this is also where coffee enters the chat. Because if I'm tired, my instinct isn't to think about NAD plus at all. It's about coffee, preferably before anyone has tried to talk to me, you know?
Yeah.
So what's actually happening when we drink caffeine, and how is that different from supporting your body's own natural energy production?
So yeah, caffeine's wonderful. I love caffeine, honestly, because I like tea, I like coffee. I'm in Washington State. It's like coffee is an important part of the culture here in Washington State. But yeah, where this comes into play is it works so differently. So in order to kind of fully describe caffeine, we need to talk about sleep because that's really where it comes into play. But there's what's oftentimes referred to like the sleep seesaw. And most people are familiar with melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that helps bring us into sleep, right? Makes us tired. Lots of people supplement it. The hormone that wakes us up is cortisol. So cortisol gets a bad rap, but it has really important functions in our body. So think that that's the seesaw. So melatonin brings you like down, cortisol brings you up. Great. So where does this even play into the rest of this? There's a molecule called adenosine. And what it does is as we wake up in the morning, it's at its lowest level, or should be, hopefully. And as it, so where caffeine will come in a second, but as we go through the day, its levels build up and it builds up the sleep pressure. And so eventually, as we get towards the end of the day, that molecule is at its highest level and it triggers the release of melatonin and we go to sleep. So what caffeine does is it blocks the release of this adenosine, helps you kind of clear it out. And so helps as a result reduce the sleep pressure. So if we haven't had enough sleep, well, our body still has the sleep pressure on. You know what I'm talking about if you wake up and you're really sleepy. But caffeine helps reduce that message for the sleep pressure and therefore helps wake you up. Kicker is one of the things that's a little bit different is, of course, if the sleep pressure message is down, then things like cortisol, that message comes up. And so cortisol levels are already typically highest in the morning when we wake up because they wake us up. But as we have caffeine, that can also get those levels back up a little bit more. And you'll hear people talk about this in different contexts. And the consequence potentially of that is cortisol can trigger other things like epinephrine and those types of deals. But so caffeine is great, but it's more about shutting off a sleep signal, not like the way NMN or NAD plus works, where it's literally giving you the raw materials at the level of the power plant to make energy. So they're related, but their functions are vastly different. And they can work together just fine because shutting off the sleep signal is important. I like that's how I start my day with tea or coffee. But also it's different though than actually supplementing the way your cells make power, if that makes sense.
That actually makes a lot of sense, and it probably explains why my morning routine has evolved. So coffee still has its place, but now it's also sharing the spotlight with Power Trip.
Yeah, same.
Now that we understand the science behind NMN, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture. A lot of thought went into every ingredient surrounding this formula and how they work together. So let's walk through the formulation decisions, starting with rhodiola. Why did it earn its place?
Question. Thank you for asking. Rhodiola, well, all these herbs are all involved in the mechanism of qi from from Chinese medicine, East Asian medicine sense. But there's real interesting research behind them as well too. And one of the things that is really interesting about these adaptogens is I often say that they work better together. And we have, like this image would show, we have a stack that's built on basically the three general regions of like your core body. So upper, middle, lower. And as you can kind of see in this image here, it relates to where like the chi mechanism is made. So obviously we breathe and disseminate oxygen and CO2 as it comes out using heart and lungs, but we also, the food we take in immediately gets processed in our stomach, and our pancreas helps with that, small intestines. So we can bring in the air, bring in the food. But then the lower part is all about waste removal, because we literally have to get rid of the waste products and also make room for all this, for this process to keep occurring. And so all three are really, really important levels. And so in order for adaptogens, which we hear so much about, in order for them to work properly, we need to address all three levels to address the whole chi mechanism. So rhodiola is meant especially for the lungs and the heart in East Asian medicine and Chinese medicine. And what's special about it is most of these herbs that kind of boost energy, boost chi, are considered warm or hot in their nature. But rhodiola is special. It's cold, and it's very unique in that way. So it gives you energy, but it's a cooling, cold type of feeling, and it's good. We kind of like to balance those energies, if you will, that those temperatures. Um, but what's interesting is there's great research that is coming out about how this happens. And there's compounds that can be found that are being studied, things called rosavins, salidrosides, even something called tyrosol, that are being looked at for how they actually work. Like, because other people have noticed the functions and the benefits, and they can see this happening. And so as the researchers get in there and start breaking out the individual pieces that are found in these herbs, they're finding these compounds and seeing that, oh, they're starting to be associated with things like fatigue and resilience, and kind of the same concepts that we use it for in East Asian medicine. So we start with the cool on top, and then we use ginseng for the next level, which is pretty cool as well. And ginseng is really, really well researched. Everybody's heard of ginseng, I feel like, at this point, but there's a compound in there called a ginsenoside. And it's actually a whole family of compounds, but they're really interesting because they they seem to be helping with oxidative stress. So the fact that we breathe and use oxygen, it can cause this oxidative stress. It's one of the reasons why we often hear about taking antioxidants to help deal with like this process that people talk about quite a bit. And these ginsenosides play a role in that as well. And so there's really interesting science there. But what's really great for us is that ginseng especially goes to nourish the chi of that middle level of digestion, and also seems to have some really interesting benefits in terms of our state of mind as well, which is kind of neat. Um,
Let's move on to the next ingredient, galangal,
yeah.
because I
Yeah.
have an example of a galangal
Yes.
root in front of you. And I have a feeling that this one is something that most people have never heard of before, but it's often referred to as the Thai ginger because it's in the same botanical family as ginger and used in similar ways for cooking. If you've ever had an authentic bowl of Thai tom yum soup, you've probably already tasted it. So, what made galangal the right choice for this formula?
Oh, great question. Yeah, it is so delicious. But beyond that, because our formula is not really meant to be used in a dish like that. So why did we put it in there? Galangal is meant for the lower part of the energy profile, and it's really, really used often warming like that vital fire that we often associate with the kidneys in Chinese medicine. And so, why, again, that's important is because we want to keep a flow going. When I first started biology, I remember being told in one of my classes, life is a flow of electrons. And it is really, really true. And we want to also keep chi flowing. And the chi and the electron idea is very, very, very analogous. Um, this electron, this chi, this idea of energy flowing, I would often use something like this in my classes. This is just, it detects the current that runs through our bodies. It's really sensitive. So one of the things I would do is have like 10 people in class hold hands, and one person would hold one end of this. And then as we connected, it makes a terrible noise, but it picks up the current running through our skin, and we would actually share that current. It's the same way we look at chi, that it has to flow, it connects. As we as we consume food, as our organs take up different roles, there's a flow, there's a process. And so we have to have all three layers, and that galangal root really builds in the foundation of not only helping aid digestion but also the waste removal process. And interestingly, the science behind galangal too is getting fascinating. As I was digging through the literature, there's a compound named for the galangal root, galangin, that is being looked at for special types of inflammation, specifically neuroinflammation. So that's something that is being researched right now about that specific compound. So more to come on that in the literature. Just fascinating to read about. When we formulate, we have the NMN definitely hitting that science component, because that's a big part of how we formulate, of course, but also making sure that when we put our adaptogens in, we're using a Chinese medical sensibility where we're not just trying to push one part of your body. True resilience, true energy comes from when all those parts are working together, because your body exists as a whole. And it also goes, we've talked a bit about emotions, like body, mind, and spirit. They're all pieces that are equally essential, can't be separated in Chinese medicine, and all support and lean on one another in times of stress, but also in times of healing as well.
That's fascinating. Let's end with something fun right now. We're calling this rooted or rumor. I'm going to throw out a statement and you're going to tell me if it's rooted in science or just an internet rumor. Are you ready?
Ooh, a test. Okay, yes.
Okay. Coffee is producing more ATP.
Just that's just a rumor. I mean, I wish it was, but it's all about just really kind of shutting off the sleep signal more than anything. And so if I was going to try and make more ATP, I would probably support that directly. And you know what I'm going to say? I love NMN for that. So,
Okay. If you're under 40, you don't need to think about cellular health.
oh man, that's a great rumor. I mean, I wish that was true. And we are certainly more resilient under 40. I can speak from my personal experience. But I can tell you, and you hear this a lot, and it sounds old when I say it, but God, I wish I would have known a bunch of these things when I was younger, because the benefits of having taken care of these different levels of my body in this way, if I was doing that when I was younger, I know I'd be reaping the rewards of that now. I've been in practice for, almost 15 years now. And so that's been a part of my life, but I really wish I would have started sooner. For instance, my son, much to his dismay, he has grown up with a lot of these resources in his life, because they don't always taste good. But I just know that it's going to help him. I want to make his path as he moves forward in this world as easy as I can. So, yeah.
I wish I knew also when I was younger, so you're not alone. Okay, the next one is living in survival mode changes how your body uses energy.
Yes, it does. And that's just intuitive. I mean, there's science to back it up, there's Chinese medicine to back it up, but we only have so much money, ATP, to spend in a day. And our body is really good at adapting to whatever comes our way, almost too good. And so it can be really hard, especially as we train it to, because it learns from us, right? Like if we know, like, we're going to hop in the car and we've got an hour of traffic and traffic's a nightmare, how could we not be in a fight or flight response? Because, like, being in traffic can be dangerous. I mean, it's the right response, but sometimes, like, when that process can't disengage and we don't have the downtime to let that chill out, there's the problem. And there's where our energy keeps getting diverted to the protect me versus the repair me kind of stage. And, related to energy, I've had the pleasure of working with athletes that are in a professional setting in the past, and they know this for sure. They spend way more time in recovery than they do in training often. Like, the second they get off the field, they're thinking about recovery now. Like, that concept is so different than it was a generation ago. And so that's one of the ways that they know that they can get the best possible output when they need it, is by the second they can divert back to that rest, digest, and heal stage, they'll be rebuilding those resilient resources for the next time they're on the field or mat.
That makes a lot of sense. That's actually also how I feel when I get off the treadmill recovery.
Yes.
So, Matt, thank you so much for lending us some of your brain energy today. I always appreciate your perspective, and I know our listeners do too.
My pleasure. Thank you, Shelby, for the questions and always lending me so much of your knowledge. So, yeah, I hope this helps. I hope to hear back from people too, like what their experiences are, what they think they could take from this, what they could share with us. I mean, I love hearing about what people are doing to help find more energy and more balance in their life, because you all are the best teachers. So that'd be great.
Yeah, and along the lines of that, if anybody in our audience would like us to talk about a topic, whether it's modern science and traditional Chinese medicine, let us know in the comments because we might feature your question in a future episode. So I want to thank everyone who's for tuning in today. We'll see you next time on Rooted in Science. Until then, enjoy your power trip.